Hi, I'm Alex Howards, and welcome to this week's episode of In Therapy. We follow real-life people on their therapeutic journeys. This week on In Therapy, we're trying something new. For the last 18 months or so that we've been broadcasting In Therapy, we've been sharing highlights of the therapeutic sessions. We've been cutting roughly an hour's therapy down to around 20 minutes. There have been benefits of that. It's hopefully made the sessions a little quicker and easier for people to digest and follow. But we've also been listening to some of your feedback and realizing that sometimes we have to cut things we really don't want to cut. And what really happens in therapy is not always neat and tidy. It's not always a kind of 20-minute kind of nicely packaged journey. That sometimes the struggle and the challenges to find those moments of insight are also really valuable to share. So we're going to be sharing pretty much the full sessions. We are going to cut out pieces where the participants might share things around people in their lives which aren't their stories to share, and it feels appropriate to cut those out. But apart from that, you're going to be able to see the full unedited sessions. But for those of you that want to have those shorter soundbite pieces, through the week, we're then going to be sharing some of the highlights. So we'll find 3, 4, 5-minute clips, sometimes 7, 8, 9-minute clips, where you can get a kind of encapsulated lesson or insight in a nice, easy, quick to digest way. We're also putting out some much shorter bits on YouTube Shorts. We're putting out little 30-second, minute-long clips as well. We're really keen to keep developing the format to find the best possible way to share the ideas that we're really committed to and passionate about sharing. I would love your comments. So when you've watched today's episode, or as you see the clips that come out over the coming weeks, let us know what you like. Let us know your preferences. In today's episode, we're going to be meeting a new participant. We're meeting Al, who is coming to In Therapy because of ongoing health anxiety. And in today's episode, his first session, we're going to be exploring some of the ways that health anxiety can be caused, some of the ways that it can impact our lives, and some of the insights that can be important to begin to get some space and freedom from it. You can watch Al's journey to In Therapy, what we call his backstory, in yesterday's video. So do watch that now if you haven't already. I think it'll be a helpful foundation to this week's episode. If you haven't already, please do like, subscribe to my channel, click the bell icon, and you'll be notified as new episodes are released. And do follow my Instagram at Alex Howard Therapy for daily inspiration and support. Well, Al, it's lovely to meet you. Thank you for being here. I've obviously seen a few notes from when you spoke to Rachel, but it'd be great to just hear from you, really. Like, what are you hoping to get from the time we've got together?
A lot. Yeah, I'm hoping to get a lot. I suppose it's been a while since I've had therapy, because I've had therapy before, and it's been a bit too long in between. So I was definitely feeling the need when I met Oliver and got chatting to him, and it seemed kind of very fortuitous timing wise, just because I'd already been thinking I really need to, address some things. So yeah, really I just want to tackle and address some blocks in my life, some things which are the source of various kinds of unhappiness and depression in places, and try to be able to get free of them, or at least learn to manage them a bit better.
Yeah. When is the last time you had therapy?
My memory of that is a bit hazy. I think I had a course of CBT on the NHS within the last 4 years.
Okay.
But certainly at least 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And I found it, and it was the second course of CBT I've had, and I found it of sort of limited use. There were some useful things, but I personally don't I'm not very good with CBT because it's very heavily reliant on me going home and doing various exercises, and I'm very bad at that, if I'm just being honest. You know?
Yeah, no, I appreciate you.
And so in the past, the kinds of therapies I've enjoyed and feel like I've got the most from have been more like talking therapies.
Yeah.
Which it seemed like this sort of was.
This is sort of a bit of everything.
Yeah, right. So,
but in a sense, I sort of see my job as having been a geek or a nerd of therapy for a couple of decades is to also use what's appropriate. So you telling me what's worked and what hasn't worked is also really helpful.
Yeah. Yeah.
When you say in terms of CBT, the homework, was it the type of homework or the having to do things outside of the sessions, do you think?
Possibly a bit of both. I'm one of the things I wanted to address in this process ongoing was my difficulty that I experienced with discipline, self-discipline, and I've never been good at doing anything that involves like regular steady kind of work, other than music. And
I was going to ask because my understanding is that you're a partly musician, and that takes a lot of practice.
Yes,
as a failed musician myself, recognize that.
Yeah, so there are areas where I'm able to do it, and what music's one, and my professional life, video editing and filming is another.
Yeah.
Other than that, one area I'd like to really improve is self-care. Any form of like meditation, yoga, some kind of regular gym habit, I just can't seem to do it. Whether that means I should just give up on it and it's not right for me and that's okay, or it means that, and I've got issues around going out and getting, having far too much to drink and getting myself into, today is actually a sort of interesting time and place to start because I just spent the last couple of days feeling dreadful, because Thursday, Friday, Saturday nights, I was out 3 nights in a row.
Wow.
And these days, if I do that, I get liver pain, I get like acid reflux. It's
getting old sucks, doesn't it?
Yeah. And it creates some kind of perfect storm with my particular set of issues around health and anxiety.
Yeah.
And I'm like, can I swear?
Yeah.
I'm like, fuck, I'm definitely giving myself cancer. I'm going to die. I'm going to, this acid reflux isn't just acid reflux, it's esophageal cancer. And
so there's a reality of what happens in your body. And then there's a kind of catastrophization of what happens.
Yeah. Yeah. And those two, sometimes I'm able to see them separately and separate them. Others I'm just not. And it can change from day to day, or it can change, or I can be in one state for weeks on end, even months, without any break, and just being convinced until I, get some kind of medical test done that proves otherwise.
And does that always work? Because I know sometimes people with health anxiety that even when they get a test result, there can be, well, the test was wrong, or the test isn't 100% accurate, or does that generally tend to dampen it?
It tends to work. Yeah.
Okay. Which in itself is a problem, right? Because then you feel you need the test.
Yeah. And the doctors, my long-suffering doctors, who know me, are like, look, every time I send you for these tests, it's enabling your problem, and but it's such an insidious problem because it's like a doctor and doctor or no one else can tell you that there's never going to be something real going on. So it's like, I've never had a satisfactory answer to that.
But also the challenge is when it comes to this kind of health anxiety, you can never think your way to a feeling of certainty, right? So what happens is one thinks about all the worst case scenarios. What if this? What if that? I'll get this test. But that there is no resolution to that anxiety on a cognitive level because there's always a comeback, right? There's always if I do this. So the resolution to it, at least in part, is to calm what's happening in the mind, and because a feeling of safety or a feeling of certainty or a feeling of okayness is not a cognitive event anyway. It's a feeling one gets in their body. The problem is the more activated you get, the more worried you get, the more your mind speeds up. It's almost like what I call like radio station anxiety. You tune into a certain frequency of thinking, and almost whatever you think about turns into anxiety, because that's how you kind of your brain gets wired up.
Yeah.
What do you remember in terms of? I know there's some different pieces to the jigsaw here, so just to follow the thread of the health anxiety a little bit. Do you remember when that started? Like what some of the origins around that?
Yeah, it had a very clear sort of start. I'd say when I was 18, and so my mother was very anxious about health things growing up, and I never was as a kid or a teenager. I wasn't bothered at all, and I was always like, "Oh, mum, stop moaning and stop badgering me." And like she would, like I was at boarding school for 7 years, and she forbade me to eat meat during the BSE crisis.
Any meat?
Yeah.
Wow.
And put the fear of God basically into me about it all. Even
just you, or you and your brother?
Our whole family, but because I'm good 10 years younger than my brothers, they were older, and I feel better mentally able to deal with that. Whereas I was
to see it for what it was, in a sense.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the truth is at that time, people were very scared, and there was a lot of people just didn't know.
Yeah.
And so, I totally understand. She wanted to protect me and the rest of it from something horrendous.
But it sounds like from what you're saying, it was also intensified by the fact that you already had this kind of health anxiety that was a thing in of itself.
Yeah. So she was worried about that and millions of other things. She wouldn't let me play rugby in case I broke my neck, and all this kind of stuff. So she tried to sort of keep me very sheltered. And then, so when I turned 18, I think maybe it was becoming a man, like something in the brain chemistry changing, but like it was like a sort of brick wall like falling on me. And for the first year of university, I was convinced that I had mad cow disease, and because it's a very like brutal and horrendous disease, and like the beginning of it can last a long time. And
I know nothing about it actually.
Yeah, it's you start to sort of lose your mental faculties slowly, but you also apparently there can be an element of like depression and I just it was the most horrible thing. It was just a sort of sense of dread, like pure fear, that was just underlying everything all the time for about a year. That was just there. And eventually I was, I could tell that, okay, I haven't progressed any worse. Right. I'm not, I'm able to function at university. I'm doing my degree fine. Eventually, slowly, I was like it sort of passed. But it was, really bad. But that was almost like a sort of opening of the dam. And then from that point on, I went from episode to episode of worrying I had various kinds of, mostly kind of cancer.
Yeah.
So the other thing I should say is that my mother passed away when I was 21 from cancer.
Wow.
So that was just like a sort of double stamp, confirmation of everything that she was,
And how did
terrified
that tie in with that year that you were particularly concerned about BSE? How did
she hadn't got ill yet.
Okay.
Yeah, so she was diagnosed, I think, I don't know, a year after that.
And was then, and when she passed, was there a noticeable amplification of your health anxiety, do you think?
It's hard to remember clearly because the whole period is a bit hazy. I'm sure I think it probably was, yeah. Obviously didn't help. And it was, anyone who loses anyone, it's a tough time.
Particularly at that age as well.
Yeah, it felt sort of, obviously it could have been worse. It could have been a teenager or a little kid, but even 21, I feel, is like on the young side. And
it is, and it's also at a stage where you're sort of separating from family, but knowing you've got that sort of soft place to fall is also still important. And then the collapse of that would have been very difficult.
Yeah, and my father, who I love very much, wasn't around a lot as I was growing up because he was an international interpreter and he was traveling for work all the time, and I was at boarding school as well. So like it was really me and my mum because my brothers left home sort of 10 years before me.
Right.
So it was like a particularly sort of brutal wrench, and so I think that didn't help, and I was just floundering and kind of lost for a long, long time. And I still, in some ways, like you said, I feel the lack of that soft place to fall even now. And I think that's at the heart of a lot of depression. And just if I'm home of an evening on my own, I feel I can, not always, but I can just feel completely blank. Why am I here? What am I doing in life? Like, what do I do with myself? Sort of directionless. Because the other thing was that she was incredibly domineering and willful as a mother. Like I was like her pet project. And I started the violin when I was 7, and I wanted to stop when I was probably 7.5. But I ended up playing until I was 17 because of her.
Wow.
She forced me.
Wow.
She never beat me or anything like that, but it was
but there was a sense of
it was emotional beating.
Yeah, no, I get it.
It was she used guilt as one of her main weapons, and it just and also I think I was never able to rebel as well, because my brothers sort of rebelled so badly that she drummed it into me that I was forbidden to do the same thing. And
wow.
So then when she suddenly died, I just went nuts. I went, just lots of heavy nights out and, getting blackout drunk, like starting fights, like all sorts, just I think, which was the rebellion that I'd.
Yeah.
And if I'm honest, in some ways I'm still in that phase, even though I'm 41.
That rebellion must have been hard as well, because in a sense you needed it. You needed to have that sort of freedom. But I wonder if a part of you also sort of felt like you were dishonoring your mum by the fact that she didn't want you to do that. Was that it might not, I don't want to put that on you. I'm just wondering given how domineering it sounds like she was in some ways, and then when you lost her, in a sense, it sounds like you kind of exploded out, and that also would have probably impacted your bond to her somehow.
After she passed away, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky one, because I do sometimes think, if she was here, whether she would be ashamed or proud or both, or I just wonder, I don't know. I have no idea. But I don't know. I don't know how much of a bond I feel at all with her, because, this is another, sorry, because there's so many areas of my life.
No, but this is what it's like at the start. I needed to jump around to get the picture.
So she was very spiritual and religious, and my family are kind of quite spiritual, more spiritual than religious. She was both. I'm most certainly neither. If anything, I'm curious in spirituality, but nothing's ever really grabbed me. And part of what I grapple with is that my feeling that really there's nothing. I'm pretty much, I've slowly come around to be pretty atheist in how I feel, and it's at the same time that feels quite dark, and it feels like depressing, and it feels sad, and I know my mother wasn't. She was totally the opposite. But part of my struggle around my feelings about my mother is that she was so far the other way. I just don't know how to relate to it, and I feel like I'm somehow a disappointment or a failure in not feeling the things that she felt, and including my brothers. My brothers, both part of this, and my father as well, part of this spiritual group, and it involves a sort of regular practice, and and it's very small, but it is worldwide, but very small. And my parents met in it. My brothers are in it, and practicing. I joined it when I was 17, because you can join when you're 17 on. And I went along to the local group, and it involves kind of like this getting into a kind of quiet state and like receiving whatever it is you receive from God, and that expresses itself in sort of movement and weird sounds that people make with their voice, and but you're not supposed to put anything on. You're not supposed to sort of do it with your will. You're literally supposed to
spontaneous arising,
be moved almost.
Yes.
And I went for every time I went, I would just be stood there with my eyes shut, nothing going on.
Yeah,
just nothing. And that's I struggle with that feeling inside of just there's nothing. There's just nothing going on, like spiritually wise.
Yeah,
my mind is incredibly active, it's overactive, and I overthink. And
but it also sounds like, from what you were saying about having like evenings at home and a sort of a numbness or a kind of emptiness on an emotional level as well. Like, it's not just an absence of spiritual kind of guidance or wisdom or direction. It sounds like there's a certain emotional numbness.
Yeah, very much. Yeah.
What is your emotional life like? Like, there's obviously a lot happens in your mind, and there's the kind of the health anxiety, and I'm getting a sense of the picture there. But in terms of your emotional life, like sadness, anger, frustration, disappointment, like just the kind of the range of emotions that people experience.
Yeah, I'd say those are four good headlines for my emotional landscape at the moment. Is those the four that you just said? Like I was going to say, like I feel, and I don't know why particularly this is recently, but well, I do know why, but I haven't got into the year I've just had with you yet. But I'm incredibly angry. Like I hate everyone. Like, and I don't. It's not that I go around treating people like shit.
No,
it's
I
all
get
in
it.
my head.
No, I get it. It's not that you actually hate them, but you have a lot of the feeling of hate that's there. And sometimes
it feels like, I'm afraid, like I just, these days, sometimes I just don't feel like a very nice or good person because of how the thoughts that I have about people. And I know it's not really to do with them, it's to do with me.
No, I understand that. And you're the one that has to live with those feelings, which is difficult.
Which is not fun. And I think it comes from frustration mainly, like frustration around the things in my life not being the way that I want them to be.
Yes.
Not living, in a place I like and happy. Just tell me to stop, but I'll carry on.
Well, I want to come about, you mentioned the year you just had that. I also want to come into that, but I just want to stay on childhood for a little bit longer. How I remember reading in the notes that you were bullied at school. Tell me a little bit about that piece.
So I mean, I was at one boarding school from 11 to 13 where I was very happy, had loads of friends. And then my mother, as part of this spiritual group, there's a process they call testing, whereby they offer up a question to God and they receive an answer, pretty much. Often it's a sort of yes or no question, and you're not supposed to ask like trivial things. It's supposed to be something really like key and important that you genuinely can't reach the answer by yourself, and what you need
like
guidance.
a sincere inquiry about something.
So my mother fell back on this process of testing too much, I think, and they tested about whether I should stay on at the senior school of this boarding school I was at, because that was the junior part of it, or go to this completely different school where I didn't know anyone, and they received that I should go to this other school. So I was wrenched out of this one school.
And it's interesting that a choice, because you were 11 when you made the move.
13.
No, 13, sorry, yeah. You had 13 years old. One would hope that you would have a say in the choice, not necessarily like you would get to choose because there's other factors. But like I think about my kid, like my eldest is 10, and we're thinking her next schooling. Like she genuinely has a voice in it. She may not get what she wants, but her voice is part of it. And it strikes me that in of itself would have been quite frustrating as a 13-year-old, that you have an imposed decision from this sort of spiritual place that I imagine that would have been quite hard.
Oh, it was awful, yeah. And, because I had really good friends. Like I remember looking out the back window, it was like a scene out of a film or something, out the back windows, tears streaming down my face. And one particular friend of mine was also crying, even though he was staying on with all our mates. There was just very strong bonds, with these kids at that age.
Which happens at boarding school, for better or for worse.
Oh,
But that's definitely
Yeah, so, and that was in Canterbury, so down south. And I got sent to this school near Peterborough in the Midlands. And I just like from the word go, it was just a disaster. Like I was very naive. Everyone is like obviously some level of naive when they're 13, but I was particularly green. And and these kids could just smell it, I think. And I was like really skinny and kind of pale and lanky and like had a big growth spurt, but nothing like width ways.
Up, not out.
Yeah. And I was just gangly and kind of awkward and innocent and naive.
And had the kids there been together and you slotted in, or everyone was starting?
I think some of them had, but like not generally, I don't think. But they were just like, they had this sort of extra, because of geographically where it was, they were a bit more, it's going to sound funny, but they were a bit more northern, a bit rougher around the edges. I was just, as they call, say, southern kind of ponce, and came from a very sort of intellectual, like, family who were very loving to each other and, open to these kids who knows what upbringings they'd all had, but rougher around the edges.
There was a harshness you weren't used to.
A harshness, exactly, yeah. And I just got eaten alive. And then for 2 years, they would do things like someone would give a signal, and like we're in the dormitory or something, and they would all like they would put me on the floor, jump on top of me, form a kind of human pile, and like put duvets over it as well, because they found out I was like claustrophobic. So that would happen. Or we'd be out in the woods we had to do combined cadet force, which is you pretend you're in the army once a week. God knows why. And we're in the forest, and again, someone gives a signal, and then they like rip off all my clothes and like, not boxes, luckily. But like leave me there and like, run away with my clothes. And then I remember like one particularly sort of humiliating time when I was like walking back from that happening, and there was a mother coming the other way with a young kid in a pram. And I was just like, this is just, And I think if I hadn't been as strong mentally, that would have been a moment I would have considered suicide, I think, because I remember it crossing my mind and just thinking, well, I'm not doing that. And I think along the way, something in me knew as soon as I got out of there, I'd be okay. As soon as I got to university, I'd be grand. And at university was like the best time of my life. Like I just...
What did you study?
Total opposite. History, UCL.
Nice.
But yeah, like I was.
But those are formative years.
And
you were there 13 to 18.
Yeah, so 13 to 15, it was really bad, and then eventually my parents told the teacher, because I didn't want them to for ages, but eventually it was just so bad, and then they told the teachers, and then the teachers were really good about it, and they just completely squashed it. But I never recovered socially. Never had a girlfriend. Nothing, like not even a hint of any kind of female interest. So.
At that time, you mean?
For the whole 5 years at school. Like nothing. And I didn't kiss a girl before I was 18. Got to university and it was all flipped on its head. And I was like a deer in headlights. I was just like, this is terrifying. So to this day, my self-esteem has not recovered. And I'm not sure it ever will be what it could have been if I'd not gone through that.
Well, I think what's challenging, I obviously believe it's possible to turn these things around at any point in life with the right support. But I think what's challenging as well is the way that the dynamic with your mum, in terms of it sounds like her nervous system was pretty on edge a lot of the time. So you didn't get the co-regulation in your nervous system that we need as a child that gives us that sense of inner safety. You then had this kind of a lot of her anxiety imposed on you. But from what you're saying, she was also very domineering. And so when you have a very domineering parent, it obstructs the development of our own sense of will and our own sense of strength. Because what should happen is we should be able to develop our sense of, I want this, I'm going to go for that. And there's space for our will to develop. When you have a very domineering parent, your will doesn't get to sort of grow. So that's probably a key part of the reason why, when you then went to the new school, you didn't have enough will to sort of own your space and stand up for yourself, which then it may have always been a bit bumpy, Southerner going to Northern school, different, but it sounds like you were particularly more vulnerable, let's say, to that environment. So certainly it then really does make sense where, well, a few things. Firstly, where the health anxiety comes in, because it sounds like the place you went to be safe was in your mind. But it also explains, I think, some of the emotional sort of emptiness and numbness, because you had to just shut all that stuff down, because you would have felt angry, you would have felt sad, you would have felt scared, but expressing any of that would have made you more vulnerable. So in a sense, you had to learn to not show those things. And the only way, when we have lots of difficult feelings we don't know what to do with, the only place to go to be safe is to go into our mind. And I think that's the strategy that you developed.
Yeah, no doubt, yeah.
So tell me about the last year.
So about a month ago, almost exactly, I was woken at 5 a.m. by very loud ringing in my ears, particularly on the left side, I think. And that then didn't go away, and then it settled down, but then sort of stayed constant. And that was something I feared, I suppose, most of my adult life because I'm a musician. I sort of, in the back of my head somewhere, I thought, well, that's probably going to happen one day. So I went and, I checked out all the sort of potentially non-tinnitus things that could be causing it. I checked the earwax, went to see an audiologist, eventually they found that I had a very, very slight, like borderline hearing loss at this specific frequency on just one side that they see when there's hearing damage from loud music. So,
and if you've only got it mildly on one side, that's a pretty light impact for 20 years, 25 years of music, right?
Yeah.
I have some hearing loss, by the way, from loud music. So it's like, it's a kind of pretty normal thing, I think.
And as soon as you start talking about it, everyone knows someone who's got tinnitus. And but I was distraught for a long time. And
you say it was a month ago, but
a year ago.
I was going to say
this month.
Yeah, a year ago this month. I'm sorry, because my understanding was it more than a month of course. Yeah.
Oh,
so
yeah,
makes sense.
And I was about to move house when it came on. I moved. Unfortunately, where I moved to, my bedroom was at the front of this house. It was an old Victorian house in quite a noisy street in Dalston. And after a month, I was just a wreck because I was used to using earplugs to be able to sleep. And with tinnitus, you can't really use earplugs. Certainly not until you adjust to it, because
it amplifies the tinnitus.
All you can hear is the tinnitus. Yeah. So not only could I not use earplugs, but I was kept awake all night by like cars driving by loudly and like people walking by us talking, and I was just in a state of constant like exhaustion and having to work and function at the same time. So 3 months after moving there, I moved out, went to my brother's place while I looked for somewhere else. Found somewhere else, moved there, had all the same problems. Because although I was told it was very quiet, it just wasn't.
Right.
Moved out of there, stayed in a hotel for a bit, stayed with a friend for a bit, moved into a short let for 6 weeks while I looked somewhere else, found somewhere else. And unfortunately, again, my bedroom, although it was at the back, the windows single glazed and the sound insulation's just non-existent.
Right.
There was one particular set of neighbors who were just arseholes, excuse my French, but like they just didn't give a fuck. They would just like be up till, out on this balcony they had out the back, just like talking loudly and if they had a party, it'd be up to 4 a.m.
Right.
I got the counts around, nothing. So again, I was just like, right, I'm gonna have to move again. So I've just moved to this completely different kind of place. It's a new build flat on the 5th floor of like a brand new tower block overlooking Walthamstow wetlands. And that's better in terms of noise, but I've only been there 2 weeks and I'm already starting to feel unhappy about various other things.
Such as?
The area, I feel a bit out on a limb. Like my dad and my brother are both sort of more like South London. A lot of my friends are kind of Dalston.
Okay.
And like Dalston's, it's not like a million miles away, but like I was used to cycling everywhere and getting everywhere off my own back. But this is just a bit too far from like some places I can still cycle. But the other thing is like the roads around there are not very nice. And like the cycle is just unpleasant. And it's just
it's like one of those areas that needs another 10 years, right?
Yeah.
It's like it's on the up and it's not got there yet.
But this is one of my problems as well, is like seeing the negative in everything. Like there's lots of positives about it, but I just see the negatives. And I've had some friction with my new housemate already about noise, even though like I met her in this short that I was in earlier in the year, and she was like, oh no, don't worry, like I know about all your issues. I know you've had a year from hell, like I'll be super respectful. But even with her, there's been issues, and like I blew up at her and because various things went wrong. And it's like, I feel like I'm probably at the age I do need to live alone, but like I'm terrified of living alone because of this numbness that I experience when I'm alone. Yeah. And because I lived alone for a year in 2014, I owned an apartment in Stratford. And yeah, I was just miserable. I was just like, every day I was doing different work. I was in full-time work in charity, nothing to do with video. So I didn't like my work. I was living in an area, again, I didn't like the area, on my own. I was just like, miserable. So I'm kind of terrified that if I am able to sort of live alone again, that'll be the same again.
So it's a tricky dynamic, right? Because there's a part of you that wants to progress and move forward and potentially be alone, but then you've got that experience of that.
Yeah.
And also it's reasonable to want to be around other people.
Yeah,
but then being around other people then raises tension and issues around. So it is one of those a bit, you're fucked if you do and you're fucked if you don't situation, and how you sort of navigate through that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That this last year, how much of the difficulty has been the tinnitus and the consequence of the tinnitus, and how much has been other sort of struggles in life coming to a head as well, do you think?
I mean, I feel like it really stemmed from the tinnitus because if it hadn't been for that, the first place I moved, I really liked, and I really liked my housemate. We got on great. And it was a beautiful, big Victorian house, huge garden in Dalston, so I just feel like if I had been able to just stay there, I would still be there now. I'd be in so I would have actually had a home for a year rather than having been constantly moving. I've got chronic lower back pain now because of, so many moves and sleeping on various different mattresses, and editing as well is, sat all day, sort of hunched over, and I just can't get any relief from that. So that's been a source of difficulty and pain and exhaustion. And I think I also mentioned in my very initial video for these guys was one of my main issues is around sleep and around switching off, and like feeling what you were talking about earlier, feeling that sense of safety. And the only time I'm ever able to have a truly like sound deep sleep is under chemical influence. And
do you use sleeping pills every night?
No,
or just when you get to a point you've not slept for a series of nights?
Yeah. I'm pretty disciplined with that. This is the thing with me. I'm a real paradox in many ways, and one of them is that I can really abuse my body, but I will kind of pull back when I'll never let it get to the point where it becomes a habit of anything. I'm able to like experiment with all kinds of drugs, not heroin, but like, the drugs that people sort of tend to take for partying, whatever. I'm able to do that, and I'm able to then leave it. The only thing that maybe is different, an exception to that, is alcohol, which I think I probably do struggle with. But again, I don't drink every day. I never have. I don't want to.
When you drink, what's the reason that you drink?
I think that I have this incredibly overactive brain. I overthink everything, and without even, I think, being aware of it, every minute of most days, I'm hounded by it. So when I drink, I'm suddenly able to be free of that.
You're self-medicating your anxiety, in a sense.
It's not, I don't feel, it's not a conscious thing if I'm doing that, but I think the conscious thing is there is a conscious process whereby I'm just bored, I'm like tired, I'm, in some various kinds of physical pain, emotional pain.
And it gives you some relief.
Yeah, and it's like, it puts me into this whole other space where I'm like suddenly a bit cheerful, because I'm not a bad drunk, I'm a good drunk. Luckily I don't become violent, I don't become like super depressive. That's the days after often.
Right.
I get really like cheerful and like, just like I become a people person. I love being out and having a few drinks.
Yeah.
And, it's just like, I feel like I'm enjoying life when I've had a few.
And how like in a week, like on average, how many times a week are you doing that?
Well, last week was unusual. That was sort of 3 nights on the trot. That's unusual. Like I'd say once or twice.
Yeah.
And again, it won't be getting sort of blind blackout drunk is very unusual, but I'll have, I don't know, like Thursday night, I just met with like one of the guys from my band and an old band member, and we were together for 4 hours, and I had 5 pints.
Yeah, so it's not completely excessive.
It's not. I'm not like, downing bottles of vodka and, on the way to work in the morning. But it's social drinking.
Yeah, but it also sounds like it's at a level that is not how you would prefer things to be. What I'm hearing you say is not that you want to go teetotal for the rest of your life. What I'm hearing you say is that there's times that you're doing it in a way that's probably not the best use of your time and your energy.
It's more, I don't mind the time I spend when I'm actually drinking. It's more the way I physically feel in the days after.
It's the price.
And then that, like I said earlier, the corresponding worry that then feeds into, my psyche.
Yeah.
That I'm like, the voice says, "Oh, you fucking idiot! You're like killing yourself. Like the very thing that you're terrified of, you're bringing on through your actions. And why can't you just not do it?" And that's the sort of dialogue.
So it's becoming relatively clear the things that you don't want, right? You don't want the tinnitus, you don't want the chronic pain, you don't want the sleep issues and the health anxiety.
Well, sorry, just to slightly interject on the tinnitus, I've definitely like much more adjusted to it.
Okay.
I'm able to sort of, if there isn't much external noise, I'm able to sleep pretty well with it. And I can use earplugs with it again.
Okay, that's progress.
Some nights, yeah.
And what do you put that progress down to? Is there anything particular that you've done that's different, do you think?
I think moving until I found a place where, I'm not sort of bothered by lots of external noise. I think there's an element of, because I know through the research I've done, the brain, just gets used to
it, adapts,
these things. Thank God. And it still bothers me, but I can feel it's happening gradually. Because at first, you're like, you have all kinds of thoughts like, is this going to send me mad?
Yeah.
Am I going to kill myself? Am I ever going to like have relief again? Yeah. The thought of like, I remember thinking, oh my God, I'll never be able to hear silence.
Right.
Which occasionally I do think, and I'm like, that's a bit, but it's more like, that's a bit shit, but it's not like, the end of the world.
So given that's, and in the place you're living now, do you feel like it sounds like it's been a bit bumpy, but do you feel like there's going to be resolution and you're going to be able to make it work? Or are you considering that you're going to have to move again?
Well, I'm locked in for 6 months. So I think unless, it really didn't work, I think I'll hunker down and try and make it work.
Yeah.
And I think it will. I think, me and my housemate had a sort of chat, and I think we come to agreements about certain things. I'm sad about it because we really were getting on great before that, and we chose to live together because we got on at this other house we lived at. So, and now it kind of feels a bit like something got a bit broken and spoiled because, I threw all my toys out the pram and I didn't react in the best way. And understandably, she kind of, didn't like that. And so, but at the same time, I feel like it sort of needed to happen because I needed to kind of slightly assert my needs and my will, even though like she said, like, well, it's a cohabitation, you got to compromise. I'm like, well, there's certain things I can't compromise on. Yeah. I'm sorry. Like, is my well-being being able to rest? I just can't. Yeah. That's not.
And you sounds like you were quite explicit at the start as well.
Yeah, exactly. And I was like, you knew what you were getting into. I'm sorry, Anyway, but so I think I'll be there for 6 months, and I think it's good as well because it's like a sort of a chance for me to have that 6 months to kind of regroup. And at least have a base for more than a month.
Which is incredibly disruptive, right? And in all kinds of ways. So it sounds like the tinnitus and the sleep is better, but it's still a consideration.
Tinnitus is better. Sleep is still a problem. Okay. I'd say, I'm feeling just tired.
The health anxiety, how is that at this point?
It comes and goes. Like the last couple of days, like I said, it's been quite bad again, and I've been struggling to not. Get into sort of fear loops of, around, because I've been having acid reflux and all that.
Triggered by the 3 nights out?
It could be, or I felt like it had been sort of coming on before that. I mean, it could be triggered by all this stress, Like I was dating somebody briefly, And she sent me today, because we sort of broke it off and it was amicable and we stayed friends, which is nice. And she was today she listed out all these things that I've been through even in the short time that I've been seeing her. And I was like, fucking hell, yeah. I mean, because I used to think, I'm not stressed. I don't have stress. Like, I'm not a stressy person. Like, actually, if you just met me in a pub or whatever, most people are like, oh, you're a really chill guy, But like, yeah, nothing's further from the truth.
That's true for a lot of us, right? What's actually going on behind the scenes is often very
obviously,
different to what it is.
Yeah. Otherwise, I'd be put in a mental home. So it could be any number of stresses that I've been going through.
So what I feel like I've got a relatively clear picture of what's going on. Obviously, there's loads more details I'm sure we'll come to where appropriate. I guess really my question to you is, what do you want? Like, if you could describe the person that you'd like to be sat here in 3 months' time, 6 months' time, a year's time, like what would be different? And I don't so much mean the absence of certain things. I mean more the presence of certain things. Like what's your hope from this process?
I hope in general to feel just a bit happier. I'm not talking about that. So I would like to be happy. I'd like to be in a relationship. That's one thing I haven't mentioned yet, but that's definitely an area of problems for me. I've been single nearly 10 years.
Well, how do you define single? It sounds like you've been dating, but you haven't.
But I just haven't had last significant relationship was 10 years ago. Or nine.
And significant is more than what, a few months or something?
I don't judge it by the time. It was the feeling and the emotions involved around it.
Makes sense.
Nothing since then has made much of an impact, let's say.
Yeah.
Had little things. And again, like with a lot of my problems, it's because I used to think, oh, I'm so unlucky. I can't, why aren't I meeting the person where everyone around me meets their people? And so obviously I know it's something in me that needs addressing. So that's another area I'd like to examine. So I'd like to, potentially be in a relationship, be happy and just, I don't know, feel just less anxious and more able to sort of rest and look after myself,
Like more at ease in yourself. Like I'm also hearing you say that it's been quite a tumultuous time of like moving, sorting this out, managing the tinnitus, kind of pain, kind of lower back pain. There hasn't been a sort of flow and an ease in a sense from what you're describing.
Yeah. I'd love my life to just feel a bit easier. Because and I'm sure this is true with lots of people, but like certain areas in my life have always been easy. Like, and for whatever reason, work and money for me are two areas where I'm just always good.
Okay.
I don't even really need to try because it's just, I'm a very methodical, organized person. So those sorts of things, I feel like they almost take care of themselves. But obviously I know that I'm doing things right to make those things go well.
And it sounds like you're also disciplined around those things as well.
Yeah, very, very, very. So I'd like to be able to look at all of the other areas of my life and feel the same sense of ease and flow and satisfaction. Whereas I'm like, I don't like where I live. I'm unhappy most of the time. Don't have a girlfriend. I used to love jogging. I haven't been able to do that since I've had this back problem. I don't know what to do about it. I feel like I'm locked out of certain areas of my life that I love. Yeah. And I can't get back to, and I want to get back to,
How much of the emotional side of things, like I'm hearing two things that I'm trying to make more sense of. So on one hand, there's an emotional numbness that you've described, like being home by yourself, and it's like an emptiness or a numbness. And then I'm also hearing you say that over the last year, I mentioned emotions like anger, sadness, disappointment, frustration, and there's been quite a lot of that that's been going on. Would you describe it as what I think might be happening, but I want you to kind of correct me. This is not I'm not saying this is what is happening. That there's quite a lot of emotion that's been happening that's kind of overwhelming. So you sort of dampen it and then you get a numbness. Is that right? Or I'm trying to make sense of where the numbness meets the kind of emotional volatility.
I mean, it could be. It's not conscious if it's right. Like I don't sort of think, oh, I've got to suppress that feeling.
Yeah, no, rarely these things are conscious.
Yeah. And I actually feel I give far too much space for my negative thoughts and emotions. Yeah. And that's again another reason I like to go out and be social and have a few drinks, because again, it just gets me out of being alone with that, and that being the only narrative.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like one of the things that I think is going on, there's always different pieces to the jigsaw, right? So, and we'll uncover and make more sense of it as we go along together. But one of the things that I think is going on is that your mind, you've got used to your mind going to unhelpful places. Be that the kind of health anxiety, be that looking for and finding the negative and emphasizing the negative. And there's kind of a lack of kind of ability to direct that thinking that just sort of gets caught in these patterns. And it's like, the more that we do anything, the better we get at doing that. And you may have come across the concept of neuroplasticity, where you train your brain, right? And it's like, it sounds like you've wired your brain towards the health anxiety. Well, that sounds like it's improved, which also shows that these things can be changed. And one of the key things with neuroplasticity is that neurons that fire together wire together. So you have a thought, you literally wire your brain a certain way. And if you actively work to change that thinking pattern, it takes a while, but over time, you actively rewire that thinking process. Yeah. So I think part of it is that there is this mental, and it's not like a lack of discipline, because you clearly have discipline in your life, but it's like it's got too much power in a sense. Like it's been allowed to sort of run away. So I think there's that. It's
very powerful. That's good.
Yeah,
perfect word for it.
Yeah. So I think that there's that piece of the jigsaw. There's then this place where it sounds like you've learnt to go to your mind as a way to get away from your feelings, which makes sense in the context of the childhood stuff that we talked about. A price of that strategy, there's two main prices to that strategy, one of which is anxiety, because when the mind runs too fast and it runs away, it's like radio station anxiety. We find stuff to tune into because that's what the brain is doing. But the other consequence is the consequence to our emotions, because our emotions go a bit numb, because all of the energy, like another way of putting it, where attention goes, energy flows. Excuse my kind of cheesy lines, but it's like your energy ends up in your mind, which means there just isn't much happening in your heart and in your belly. And then it's like it leaks out in like another, mixing my metaphors here, another way of thinking about it, like all the emotion gets sort of shoved into a black sack that you sort of gets bigger and bigger, and then you walk around, it's kind of a burden, and one ends up feeling a level of emptiness because it's all in there, but also almost depression because you're being depressed by all of this stuff that you're carrying around. And then every so often something happens and like the lid comes off and it all comes blurting out, like it sounds like it happened a bit with your flatmate, and then it all goes back in again. And the pathway to working with it has a few different pieces, but one of which is we want to take back some of the power in your mind, like to install some discipline in some of the thinking processes and to not overindulge those patterns, because we recognize that the more energy you give to those thoughts, the more power they get. And there's a certain practice of learning to train that thinking a certain way. But in doing that also, connecting them more into the feelings and actually working with some of the feelings and the emotions that are there. And we don't have to go into it right now, but I think there's probably also a piece in there around relationships, because in a sense, to really feel love and joy and connection, one has to be open-hearted enough to also feel sadness and loss and hurt. And when we've been through a significant grief, that often has an impact that our heart closes because it's a way of protecting us. If we've been around a particularly dominant parent, again, our heart closes because we have to protect ourselves from all of that. And in a sense, the way that a lot of these things work is that we don't set these things up intentionally. They get set up by the circumstances and the experiences. And then we just do them for a lot of years and they just become normalized. In a sense, they become the person that we take ourselves to be because that's what we've always done. And I think the potential of a process like this is we're starting to put a spotlight on these things and go, okay, that's how it's been for the last 20 years or 30 years, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that way for the next 10, 20, 30 years. And this goes back to what I was saying to you right at the start. Part of it is awareness, like that awareness is really important. But part of it is also having the tools and the strategies to work to retrain and to change those patterns of thinking. And I think going back to what you were saying earlier around the CBT, for example, I think CBT has a place, but one of the limitations is you're working very much in a rational, logical way. And I think the issue here is not actually a rational, logical issue. You're too rational. Actually, the issue is more you're too in the thoughts and not enough in the feelings, and CBT just won't touch that.
Definitely. I think you hit the nail on the head with that. It's always felt like I'm jumping through hoops and for the sake of it, and then they're like, and then you feel better, right? And I'm like, no. So
I also think, and I don't know the answer to this piece, and I think it will become clear as we work together. But I'm reflecting on what you said around struggling with homework, for example, doing CBT. And the question I'm asking myself, I'm not sorry asking you to answer, if you have an answer, great, but is how much of that is you weren't doing it because actually it wasn't working, as opposed to weren't doing it because of another reason? Because what I'm hearing is someone that is very disciplined around work, around money, two areas that a lot of people really struggle actually to be disciplined around. Is basically disciplined around use of recreational drugs and alcohol. Like, I hear you'd like to drink a lot less, but I'm also really hearing you say you can go and you can do stuff and have a great time and recognize your limits and stop. So there's discipline that's there as well. So what I don't know the answer to, and I think it will become clear, and whatever the answer is, we'll work with it, is if you have tools and strategies that feels like they are working, will you then be able to discipline and follow through? My guess is you will, but I think that will become clearer.
No idea at the moment. That's the goal.
So in terms of homework and kind of and next steps, obviously today a lot of what today is about is just making sense, and you've been very articulate in laying it out. And I feel like I have a basically solid sense of what's happening. It doesn't mean there aren't details that will fill in and become clearer, but I feel like I understand what's happening. I feel like I have a sense of where we need to go, and I feel like it's kind of territory that I've traveled enough times with people that I feel a confidence that I can be helpful.
Right.
I think I'm trying to think of a sort of homework in the next piece, and I think it's probably a few things. Firstly, I think it's just we've talked about quite a lot, and we've put a spotlight, and I've put some things out there, some that sounds like have resonated. So firstly, just sitting with that and reflecting on that in of itself, I think, is a helpful process. And there's always a balance between putting somebody through a predefined map when inevitably people need different things in different ways. There is a program that they've got two programs, and quite often when I was in online programs, that when I work with people, I give them homework of watching stuff between, and it does a couple of things. Firstly, it allows things to keep moving outside of this conversation, but it also gives deeper context around things where I might spend 3 minutes explaining something, you get a 30-minute explanation, and actually things often land better because there's more substance in the explanation. So although we won't necessarily follow this program module by module, step by step, there's a couple of things that would be good to do in the homework. One of which is the first module, which is quite a lot about motivation, beliefs, follow through. And I think just putting some of that foundational stuff at the beginning of our journey together, I think would be helpful. You mentioned earlier that you've struggled with things like meditation, mindfulness. Just tell me briefly what the struggle has been. Like, either it hasn't worked or you haven't been disciplined in doing it, or?
Probably the latter more, because I know that for it to work, you kind of have to, do it regularly. So I've never really got past doing it once or twice at a time. And it's just switching my brain off, and that's the same reason I think I've got such trouble sleeping as well, is just being able to not switch it off, but like, allow the thoughts to come and go, as I know they say in meditation.
Yeah. I mean, the headline of my thesis on sleep is what happens at night. It's a reflection of what's happening during the day.
Yeah.
So when people don't sleep at night, normally it's because their system's overactivated during the day, which means it doesn't switch off properly at night. So a consistent meditation practice, I think, would be very helpful for you. It's not going to fix everything. It's not the only piece. It may not be the most important piece. But I think what it will do is it will help calm things a little bit.
Yeah.
It will, I think, improve your sleep. I think it will also help you get a little bit less in your mind and a bit closer to your body. That's the second module in the program I'm going to send you. And the third module, which I'd also like you to do, is a module around building more awareness of some of the different patterns and also rating and looking at your nervous system. I think the nervous system piece is a quite important thread for you in this, because looking back to childhood, not having that proper co-regulation with your mum because your mum was anxious, then the bullying experiences and then the health anxiety, all of that stuff ramps up the nervous system.
Yeah.
So if we can just calm your overall system day to day, it's going to help calm the health anxiety. There are reports of it helping tinnitus for some people. I'm not making any promises about that. But that you've probably seen some of the research about overactivated nervous system and tinnitus, and there is certainly some evidence that's there. It may also help the chronic pain. There's also research around overactivated nervous system and pain. So I'm not making any promises on any of this. But the worst that's going to happen is those things aren't going to improve, but you're going to feel calmer. And it may be that some of those things are also impacted by that piece as well. So the first 3 modules of the Reset program, I think, will be really helpful between now and next time. There are exercises. I'd like to do those exercises and do that homework. And then next time, obviously, we'll see where that goes. And then I'd like to get a bit more into some of the practical tools. I'd like to get some pieces in place that just help get some initial settling of things. And then we can come to some of the other issues like relationships and those pieces. That's how I'm mapping it at the moment. But I'm well known for changing my maps at a minute's notice because what we need is different. How does that sound? Any questions for me at this point?
Yeah, no, that sounds good. Yeah. I feel like, both with mental and physical exercise, sometimes what I feel I don't know for sure, but would help me get kick-started on those things is somebody sort of telling me to do it. So that's good, because I won't tell myself. Do you know what I mean? But hopefully down the line, I can get to that place where I will.
That makes total sense.
Yeah. So.
Good. Well, it's great to meet you, Al. Thank you for being here and being part of this process. And I'm looking forward to working together.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Good. You're welcome. I hope you found this week's episode helpful. We'd love to hear your thoughts, reflections about seeing a full unedited session. Please do let me know by commenting in the comments below this video. In next week's episode, we're going to be following up with Sanaya. This is Sanaya's second session. You may remember that Sanaya came to In Therapy to work with some quite debilitating anxiety and at times panic attacks. In next week's episode, we're going to be really exploring some of the biology of anxiety, what's actually happening in our body when we experience anxiety, and how that understanding can help us become free from the anxiety we are experiencing. Here's a taste of what's coming up next week.
I don't even feel anxious anymore. I just feel really low. I've just found it hard to carry on.
What feels scary and overwhelming and out of control, there's a whole science to it. There's a whole mental, emotional, physiological process that's happening, and we can understand it and we can learn to change it.